would join if you would allow me to.
I'm cool with that.
Awesome. So yeah, I can like get the official drop in or whatever shoot whenever I get cleared to actually like meet up. In the meantime, I'm coming to class.
We're about in. 3, 2, 1, 0. Well, welcome to week 2 of the African American experience, down from the pyramids, up from slavery. Winter term 2015. Carrying on, I'm responding to a couple of email things that were had questions about the readings, and also a mention in the syllabus of some subject matter. I try and mix up the class every time it's delivered over the last 15 years. So sometimes it's different. So like last week, we were on the syllabus, it referred to axiology, which I glancingly referred to. And let's see, isms and before Kemet. So I'm still going to do the isms and before Kemet because it's timely. Because some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of how ethnic studies came to be, and some of the things like around the Columbus narrative, those are basically type 3 and type 6 types of isms, and we'll get into that shortly. Before we do that, though, to recap, if you could go to slide, please. To recap and emphasize, there's a paper due, an extra credit assignment due on Wednesday. My preference is to turn in order of preference, to turn in papers physically, to Building 1, Room 226, which is my office, the Recovery Center, the Social Science Office on the 4th floor of the Center Building, or through email. Even though it's all caps here, it's actually lowercase harrism@lanecc.edu. So that's both the extra credit piece and the first reaction paper. So the paper is the reaction paper of everything that's gone on before, as well as the readings in the book, and the extra credit assignment, which means it's outside of the 5 papers and or your optional research paper. But my preference is, like old school, turn in papers physically. So the African American experience in plexity, that is simplex, complex, and multiplex. So last week we were talking about the constellation known by various names as the Big Dipper, the Starry Plough, the Great Bear, Ursa Major, or by its original Arabic name, Al-Mizan, the scales. So simplex is the constellation. Complex is different names, different stories, different histories, different beliefs around the same constellation. So understanding that, all right, the thing that you may know by its name, the drinking gourd, the Big Dipper, actually has multiple histories, and some of those histories deal with our present realpolitik in America. Then the multiplex, the implications for the present in those plexities, simplex, complex, multiplex. The implications that are present that can guide understanding and therefore action. So you can't know the entire story except through multiple points of view, and that's one of the meanings of multiplex. So complex, so the constellation is an identifiable two-dimensional pattern of stars. Almazan, Starry Plough, Great Bear, Big Dipper, and the Drinking Gourd. So that first extra credit assignment, just to recap, in the paper book, the pagination might be slightly different if you acquire the book on Amazon, as a couple of people have talked about for their Kindles. So the pagination is different in an electronic format, but essentially the information is still there. In the frontispiece, where he basically talks about the dedications to his various teachers, and look up in particular the first and last names. I believe it's Cheikh Anta Diop and Ali Masri on the names referenced in the list of dedications, and previously referenced African historians, and then be able to define the differences between hominids and pangids, and list all life forms referred to in italics on page 351. Now, in the syllabus it talks about Asante's focus on the age of literacy. So one of the things I want to point out to you is that literacy is not simply being able to read and write print. It's also to be able to see situations developing and situations in the past, as well as what's going to happen, what might have happened, what will happen. So things that may not be necessarily referred to directly or overtly. So I'm not necessarily going to get into all that, but that extra credit, for example, when somebody asked an email, so Cheikh Anta Diop, check out who he is, Ali Masri, Egyptopithecus, and all those other life forms. So drawing a line in language that makes sense to you in 2 pages. That's the extra credit piece, and the reaction paper, which is 1 to 2 pages. So multiplex, as I was expounding upon the idea and the kind of the emphasis of this class, and also the African American experience. So it was Africans who originally named this particular constellation, at least the stars. So the 2 stars, Al-Qaeda, from which we get, and which the group Al-Qaeda takes their name. Basically, there's a whole mythology around that particular worldview about where that name came from and what it means to be part of that group, as referred to the story around this particular constellation. So Al-Qaeda and Dubhe, the 2 stars, which if you think of this as a dipper, so the star that's the farthest tip on the handle and the star that's the lip, appear to be farthest away from each other in the constellation, but actually if you understand the spatial relationships, they're closer in space to each other than either is to Earth. So that doesn't look like it from the 2-dimensional point of view. So the idea of being multiplex is things on the surface are not always what they seem underneath. So Al-Qaeda is essentially 206 light years away from Earth. Dubhe is 106 light years away from Earth. And the closest star in the constellation Megrez is 60 lights away. So those who appear to be opposites may actually be closer than you think in many ways. So we have a term for this, friend and enemy, frenemy. Lincoln and Douglas being opposites, but their birthdays formed the original Negro History Week, which was expanded in the mid-60s to Black History Month. W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington wrote a book called Up From Slavery, and that forms part of the terminology of the name of this class. But I'm more closer to Wade Nobles and W.E.B. Du Bois than Booker T. Washington Outlook, so it's down from the pyramids, up from slavery. Martin and Malcolm, according to the late Maya Angelou, who was friends with both of them, were also friends, even though they appeared to be polar opposites in terms of tactics and philosophy. George W. Bush and Bin Laden, who appear to be opposites but are probably closer to each other than either one of them is to us. So this way of looking at things where you have the union of opposites or diunitologic, or the union of complementary opposites, is a multiplex view, which means you have to go beyond the surface where people appear to be opposed and look to where they actually might have something in common. So this is part of the underlying principle of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You have to understand why your enemy is your enemy and why your enemy's enemy could be friends with you. And you have to understand the whole complex history and simplify it in order to be in action. So as I reviewed last time, the Bush family and the Bin Laden family had been business partners. Though the Bin Laden family disavowed Osama's action, they were also given special treatment in that while the rest of us were grounded during 9/11, that family were allowed safe passage out of the country before they could be questioned by the FBI and American intelligence. And as written by one of Bin Laden's sons, he talked about it was a CIA plane that took us to Tora Bora. So while they were saying, oh, we don't know where Bin Laden is, this guy is saying, yeah, it was a CIA plane that took us there, and Mom was pissed. Because here we were living in a palace in Saudi Arabia, and now we're living in a cave. So it doesn't matter the cave has carpets, we're living in a cave. So that wasn't fun. So I suspect this is my opinion only, but I suspect this is partially why there was no real attempt to find or kill Bin Laden during the Bush administration. Notice that he wasn't killed until Obama. It's not like they didn't know where he was or couldn't find him, or they said they couldn't find him, but who knows, for real. So it's not the first time that, for example, personal business relationships have been put over the security of the country. And certainly not the first time even by the Bush family. So when you have people who pretend to be patriots, but their real alliance is not to the nation state, but to their business interests, this is again a way of looking at complex relationships. More on that next term, but the preceding analysis was brought to you by Kawaida, a 21-element construct developed in the 60s to instruct African Americans about African culture, and which can be used as an analytical and problem-solving tool. The 7 principles of blackness, which you know of as the 7 days of Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba, and also part of that Kawaida construct is 7 products of culture: politics, economics, science, history, creativity, psychology, and spirituality, and 7 levels of organization: individual, family, informal group, organization, institution, nation, and globe. So 21 elements. So when you look at a particular situation, you can analyze it from those points of view and come up with a solution if one isn't presented by the history. And we'll talk about this more. But just so you know, since I made this reference to Kawaida, where it came from, this is from the website where if you Google that word Kawaida, Kawaida is a communitarian African philosophy developed by Maulana Karenga, an activist, scholar, and chair of the organization US, one of the major Black Power organizations in the 1960s. He still teaches at Cal State Long Beach, if memory serves. And this is from their website. The philosophy of which we speak is Kawaida, which is an ongoing synthesis of the best of African thought and practice in constant exchange with the world. One of its central tenets is that culture is the fundamental source of a people's identity, purpose, and direction. Thus, Kawaida is in fact a continuous dialogue with African culture, asking questions and seeking answers to central and enduring concerns of the African and human community. So there might be some debate as to what constitutes the best of African thought, right? But there you have it. At the heart of this project is the continuing quest to define and become the best of what it means to be both African and human in the fullest sense. This involves an ongoing search for models of excellence and paradigms of possibilities in every area of human life, but especially in the 7 core areas of culture, history, spirituality and ethics, social organization, political organization, economic organization, creative production, art, music, literature, dance, etc., and ethos. Ethos is part of your values, belief system, how you act in the world. It also involves creating a language and logic of liberation, one of opposition and affirmation, and a corresponding liberational practice to create a just and good society and pose an effective paradigm of mutually beneficial human relations and human possibility. So, the African American experience is multiplex. We don't just think outside the box. For us, the box is actually a hypercube, a tesseract, and I'll show you what that is. So don't go asking the average black person, unless they're a nerd, what about tesseracts. But some might have experience. Might have experienced our no blood, no foul rules in street ball, and basketball. Right? Kind of, I'm into Star Trek, so kind of Jem'Hadar or Klingon. No blood, no foul. Certain level of intensity. Motherwit talks about making a way out of no way. Or, as I was instructed by my elders, speak the Queen's English better than the Queen, know the Queen's history better than the Queen. And old school, if you're on time, you're late. That is, you got to be early. Earlier than what they say, because they always switch the time on you. So if you're on time, you're late. And you have to be twice as good to be considered equal, which, as an algebraic expression, is 2x plus y equals greater than or equal to, or x is white supremacy, and we'll talk about what that is about in a second. So for us, the box is a tesseract. That's construct a 4D, 4-dimensional hypercube. So the reason I use this image a lot is that, let's say that's you in the center of the inside of the cube. So your world could be made up of your age, your gender, your social class, your race, and a bunch of other factors that are 6 sides of the cube. Now, and that might make up your identity. who you are, or who you think you are, or who you have been led to believe you are. Now, you might not see that that concept of who you are has been shaped by someone else. And so part of getting outside the box is understanding how you've been shaped and pushing back and defining for yourself. That's why, for example, the second day of Kwanzaa, Kujichagulia, is self-determination. You have to define for yourself who you are. Are we up from slavery? Is being Americans the best we can be? Or are we down from the pyramids? Hence the name of the class. Down from the pyramids, up from slavery. I say we're down from the pyramids. America is not the best we can be. So if you're taking notes, draw the dots inside the box. Okay, so 9 dots inside the box. So, the assignment, your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to connect the dots using only 4 lines and don't lift off the paper. And since this is television, I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And I already gave you a hint on how to do it.
Don't lift the pen off the paper.
Can't lift the pen off the paper. And you can only use 4 lines. Let's see here. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so the instructions were, right? 9 dots in the square. Connect all the dots with 4 lines. Don't lift off the paper. Now, the solution is not inside the box. You can't do it inside the box. Okay, so I did not say stay inside the box. The solution ain't inside the box. Okay, so part of what ethnic studies is basically information from outside of the Columbus discovered America narrative that we have always had as African American people, being somewhat having an older culture than America. Our solutions have come from outside of the box. Always. Now, we do try and use some solutions from inside of what is Western civilization, but if those solutions don't work, then we don't stay inside that box. Why should we? Okay, solution is outside of the box. So, squares, this is an old jazz term. A square is someone who is not hip. A hipster knows what's up. That's why hip hop takes a lot of its samples from jazz, because jazz was the hip hop of its era, particularly bebop. Okay? A improvisational artistic form that questions certain social realities. It's economic inequality, racism, racial violence. I mean, if you think things were bad these days with the cops, just think about what happened when you could get lynched. And it was like 10 black people a day being lynched across the country, not just simply one every 28 hours by the police. You could be killed by anybody, and the police wouldn't do anything in this jazz era. Right? So people would create music that talked about this, like Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. Okay, so a hipster knows what's up. Then what's up is what's the hidden history, the real deal, what's on the down low, on the QT, keeping it quiet, the word on the street. Squares see only what's on the box. And a fuller humanity has to operate outside of the box. Okay, so to sum, the box is part of a hypercube. That is, squares are not taught to see the hypercube. They aren't taught to see beyond the printed page to the backstory. I'm part of the press. There is always a backstory. How did we get here? And where are we going? Okay, so if you can't think on a higher plane, you can't be free, because you cannot conceive of what freedom is. So this person, Bob Moses, notice the figure that he's got. He is a Harvard-trained mathematician that was a SNCC organizer, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Organized people to vote in Mississippi. He also created the Algebra Project, which basically the basic value of the Algebra Project is algebra is a civil rights issue. And why algebra is a civil rights issue? Is because if you don't get algebra in middle school, you don't go to college. So sometimes algebra, in fact mathematics, and other disciplines aren't used to lift you up, they're used to keep you down by how they're taught. So if you didn't know, well, black people invented algebra. So why is it so difficult for you? You should actually be getting it. Why isn't it taught in a way that makes sense for you? Let me give you a freebie. You want to write this down, definitely. So, algebra. This is Arabic. Al means the. Jabra is two things. One, it's the name of the guy that invented it, a prehistoric, and what I mean by prehistoric, before the year 0. We're in the year 2015, right? Or 5781, which is in the Egyptian calendar. Muslims have a calendar like around 700 some odd. Jews have a calendar around 5,000 some odd, right? So different people have different calendars according to specific dates. Prehistoric. Hassan ibn Jabr is the guy who invented algebra, and he's before the year 0 in our calendar, right? Prehistoric, right? Because where does history begin as far as we're concerned? As I said last week, the Egyptians thought that time began 36,000 years ago. Well, how does time begin 36,000 years ago? Well, I'll explain that later. But in order to have a calendar, you have to have numbers first. Make sense? So, when do you decide to invent numbers? How does that come up? Right? Algebra, Hassan ibn Jabir, but the mending. Okay, so the image is as of a broken stick. Sorry, I'm a psych major, not an art major. All right? Broken stick. The equal sign is between the broken stick. Okay, uniting the pieces. So what you do to this side, you got to do to that side on the equal sign. So if you take an algebra, right? Algebra is a requirement for you to graduate from college, right? So they're not teaching you this part of it in algebra, but I'm telling you that it's not simply mathematical, in its culture of origin, is not simply mathematical calculation. It's problem solving. Actually, you're taught algebra in math as a way of logical thinking. All right? So the idea with problem solving, okay? What is it's called order of operations in algebra, right? PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. What's the P stand for?
Parentheses.
Parentheses. Exponents.
Multiplication.
Division, addition, subtraction. Okay? Do the hardest thing first. And if you do the hardest thing first, then everything else falls into place. Right? All right, so if we're going to apply this to human life, but in particular black human life in America, okay, what I was told old school, 2x plus y is greater than or equal to x, and x equals WSCP. So, Pops told me, you have to be twice as good as your white hippie friends to be considered in a job where their father owns the corporation. They can get the job just by knowing somebody in the corporation that owns the corporation. But if you want their job, you're going to have to be twice as good as them. Okay? So let's say that X is white privilege. And they have a tactical advantage just from skin color. Well, you're going to have to be twice as good. Speak the Queen's English better than the Queen. Okay, no sports metaphors, no Shakespeare, no all this stuff that is common knowledge for them that gives them a certain advantage. Plus, you're going to have to know twice that and why. See the code? All right, now, if you're going to use this as I do in therapy, Afrocentric therapy. So, it's PILF-DAS. Pain, loss, fear, depression, anger, serenity. You have to understand the things that might hold you back. Pain, loss, fear, depression, anger, And you have to solve those before you can reach serenity or peace. But you have to do the hardest thing first. Now, part of the things that, where this class doesn't just simply focus on history, it also focuses on, okay, what have we done to be able to overcome, think outside of the box and still succeed within America, right? So, that's part of it. Backstory, you don't necessarily get that in a book. So, 4-dimensional hypercube. 6-dimensional hypercube. So if you can see that a 6-dimensional hypercube, when we talk about operating outside of the box, and the box is a square, and we already have to operate like that, outside of the box, outside of a simple square, to 6 dimensions or 10 dimensions. And I'm suggesting that this is not alien to us. We already do this. So this is this is a photograph I took. So describe what you see here.
Body of water.
Body of water, okay.
See a water skipper on
A water strider, okay. Do you see the actual water strider or its shadow?
the shadow mostly.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you one other hint. It's high noon when this shot is taken. The water is actually moving very slowly, but it's moving. The water strider itself is in the shot. And I call this 5 worlds. Okay, so can you see the water strider itself?
Not really, no.
Okay. Well, you can if you know where to look. I told you it's high noon. All right, so the sun is directly above. And the water strider is in this shot. So that shadow, what is that shadow? Notice that shadow. What is that shadow caused by? How does a water strider work?
I don't even know what that is.
Okay. So, if you have liquid.
Yeah.
So if this were clear, you would see that there's a thin layer at the very top of the water that's caused by surface tension. And a water strider glides on top of the water, and it's light enough so that it doesn't go through the water, and it has these little hairs on its feet that are kind of like skates. So it like skates on top of the water. But it does weigh something, so, but it doesn't break the surface of the water because it isn't heavy enough to break through the surface tension. So, the sun's at high noon straight up. So what happens to light when it hits water?
Reflect.
Well, it refracts, right. So if you were looking at a spoon in a glass of water, the spoon would appear to be broken because of that refraction. Okay? So the water strider's shadow is straight below the water strider. It just appears to be slightly off because of the refraction. So if you draw a line straight up,
Is that it right there?
yeah, okay. So if you see the brightness in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, it's an insect, so 6 legs spreading out. Those places. There it is. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because in order to see in multiple dimensions, as Africans do, you have to see multiple dimensions. You have to see invisible stuff, or stuff that's invisible to other people, and be able to detect it. So, the African American experience is like this photograph. It's entitled 5 Worlds. So, first world is the viewer. The second world, where the shadow is, the water strider shadow is the underwater world, below the surface. The third world is the reflection of the surface. So, for example, this is actually this rock, which is above the water and reflecting on the water. Did you see that? And the invisible world, that is the water surface. Can't see it at all. And you only know that it's there because sunlight's reflecting is going through it, but the water strider, where it is, it's reflecting back. So this is an artistic analogy, right? So I'm going beyond the analogy, just showing you water strider shadow, the rock's shadow on the surface, and the water strider and several of its legs. So, x, like I said here, 2x plus y, there's a hidden curriculum. Now, hidden curriculum is actually part of the science of education. How do you teach people? What do you teach people? So the overt curriculum is what's the words on the page, the words on the book. The hidden curriculum is why did you choose those particular words? And how are you teaching? And what's the message by what you leave out, as well as what you leave in? So the hidden curriculum. The visible narrative is what that says. So, what you write down. And then the invisible stories. So that the visible curriculum, the visible narrative it's like an iceberg. And what's above the water is what they tell you, and what's below the water is what supports what they tell you, but they don't tell you. And also what's left out. So, for example, 2,800 years ago, the Tsalagi people, you know them by the French corruption of the Tsalagi name Cherokee, reported the presence of a person they referred to as the Pale One, a spiritual leader who brought wisdom teachings that spread throughout Turtle Island. Now, we don't know whether the Pale One means that he's white. It just could have been that he was lighter than them. Who knows what it means? The Pale One. But this was not in the Columbus discovered America narrative, and 2,800 years ago means it's before Christ, too. So unless you believe in reincarnation or whatever, who was this person? Yeah.
Could it have been just a spirit of some sort as opposed to an actual being?
Could, but they identify it, the story identifies them as a person. All right? So this is already outside of the box of the Columbus discovered America narrative, but is part of the narrative of Turtle Island. Right? So, Native people were primed for the return of the quote-unquote good white brother. Right? A person. Or at least they were not suspicious and had no reason to be suspicious of people like Columbus. Which partially could explain the Taino people's reception of Columbus. Oh, cool, good white brother, let's give him gifts, this is what we do with strangers. It's not what he thought, but they didn't necessarily recognize that. Okay? The teachings of Yeshua, who you know by his Greek name Jesus, were initially violently suppressed by the Romans and were later adopted by those attempting to resurrect the Roman Empire using a weaponized form of Christianity as the glue, the glue to hold the culture together rather than military force. So weaponized because it advocated killing opponents, killing adherents of other religions or traditional cultures, and forced conversions on pain of death. Well, how many armies did Jesus have? And how many people did Jesus and his followers kill at the time? 0. So where do you get the idea of Christian soldiers? Not from him. And who killed Jesus? The Romans, because if it were the Jews, he'd be stoned to death, but he was crucified. Okay? Romans killed Jesus, and then used his religion as a justification for conquest, because God said we could do it. So, in England, starting with the Romans and continuing with the English, traditional Irish and Scots were ethnically cleansed by Christians. In other words, they're a form of genocide. Convert by the sword or enslaved. Okay, the Eastern Aramaic-speaking church, Aramaic is the language that Yeshua spoke, never engaged in any crusades or wars, never engaged in pogroms, which is a special kind of genocidal ethnic cleansing, any genocides against natives, slavery, never, to this day. So the Greco-Roman Western Church essentially provided the quote divine unquote justification for the expansion of Western civilization. It was God's will to spread the good word of their version of the gospel. And if you don't accept the version, we'll kill you. So obviously Christians aren't the only ones that go with this idea. Certainly, what we've seen with some adherents of Islam in some countries, they do the same thing. But essentially the body count is higher on the Christian side if we look at history, at least the history on this continent. Okay? So this trend of the Western Church, represented by the Crusades, the Inquisition, led to policies regarding non-Christians, including baptism before executing Aztec babies. Not exactly what Christ meant by suffer the little children, but, certainly in my comment, and don't bomb my house for saying this, like, really, Boko Haram using little girls as suicide bombers? What's up with that? But it's, Christians did this on this continent too, killing kids before converting. So, don't talk to me about who's a terrorist. Look where the body count is. All right, so we talked last week a little bit about the doctrine of discovery, which was articulated in 2 separate proclamations by 2 different popes, that any Christian, and at this time Christian meant literally white, European whites only, the European whites only version of Christianity, any Christian who discovered lands not previously inhabited by Christians, and this included non-European versions of Christianity in Africa because they existed, could claim those lands for all of Christendom forever. And even if the inhabitants converted to Christianity, they lost title to the land forever. So this is where I basically talk about the beginning of what we understand to be contemporary racism, where the origin came from. So about 700 years old, roughly. So where then, if the church basically starts the racist policies and saying, well, God cursed black people and that's why they're black. God gave us the instructions that we need to conquer the planet by spreading the good word and converting people. Then if the church then also controls the university, they're also going to control the science that comes out of the university too. So this historical scientific racism, so part of the piece that I talk about in terms of the people that raised me and the stuff that I read to build this class, I'm a social scientist and I got degrees in psychology. So I study the teachings and writings of black psychiatrists. Like, where did racism come from? Where did they get this idea? Where did it come from originally, right? So, historical scientific racism. There is a view. Let's see, actually, this is out of sequence, I think. Yeah, right. Oh well, I'll just go back for a second. So there's a view that basically held that black people were inferior by creation. Black people function best when they stay in their place, that is, inferior to whites. Social tasks and privileges normal to white men are too stressful to the black man. Blacks living in unnatural freedom in the North were prone to insanity. Mental health was associated with contentment with a subordinate place in society. Protest was a sign of derangement. So Dr. Samuel Cartwright, white Southern physician, coined maladies which affected runaway slaves. And the reason we mention Dr. Cartwright is because he's kind of one of the founding fathers and original thinkers of what becomes the American Psychological Association, which to this day does not recognize that racism exists as a mental illness. So, drapetomania aegypticus, the flight from home madness, a mental illness that caused slaves to run away from slavery. In other words, you were crazy to want to escape slavery. And diaesthesia aethiopica, also known as rascality, by overseers. Slaves destroyed property, avoided work, and raised disturbances with the overseers. So that was a sign of mental illness, too. So if you've seen, for example, the movie 12 Years a Slave, where he basically has to hide the fact that he can read, because they'll kill him. That's not Hollywood. That is actually real. So this is from Racism and Psychiatry by Alexander Thomas and Sam Sillen. So in the historical view of the scientists, because remember this is science of the time in the 19th century, blacks had smaller, less complex, and less evolved brains. One theory of racial superiority, basically that was biblically based, held that Caucasians or Caucasoids were the superior race that evolved after the biblical flood, that is Mount Ararat in the Caucasus Mountains, hence Caucasoid, which literally means of the Caucasus. So in this old framework, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid. So one of the things that we look at in terms of language, because language often reflects what your thinking pattern is, Caucasoid of the Caucasus, Mongoloid of Mongolia, Negroid. Where is Negroidia? Where's Negroidia? right? So if you think A, B, what comes after B? C, all right? So land-based, Caucasoid, land-based, Mongoloid. Do you think that 1700s Germans know that black people come from Africa? Yes, they do. So logically, they should be called Afroid, right? But they don't call them that. So a psychologist asks, so what is the psychology of calling somebody out of their name and away from their land base? Okay, so when I said last week, when I talked about homeland, if your people haven't been there for 100 generations, you a newcomer. It ain't your home. Whatever the government may say. Okay? Because if we look at it, and this is not my opinion, this is human culture. What language is spoken in England? English. What language is spoken in Germany? German, Italy, Italian, French, France, Czechoslovakian, yada, yada, yada. Russia, Russian. I mean, okay, right? The land is the people are the land, and that language. You know, traditionally, if you've been there for 100 to 1,000 generations, that is 2,000 to 20,000 years, the view is the land teaches you to speak. The spirits of the land teach you to speak, and that becomes your language. That becomes your identity. Now, Negroid means, well, black people. But there's no land connected with it. So, for example, Sir Robert Downes, who coined the term Downs syndrome, or who Down syndrome was named after, held that Mongolism, that is, Mongoloid features in people with that form of mental retardation, were evidence of the inferiority of Asian people. Because the superior people were Caucasians, and then Mongoloids devolved from them, and Negroids devolved from Mongoloids. So black people were inferior to white people, and this is their science. Okay, so today we may call people with Down syndrome developmentally disabled, and nobody refers to Mongoloid anymore, but that was the term back in the day and where it came from. So those views were widely held and formed official policy well into the 20th century. So where that came from, so this formula is a way of understanding intersectionality. And the idea is this, that C R squared A cubed SH. So classism, racism, religion, spirituality, addiction, ability, age, sexism, heterosexism are interlocking forms of discrimination based on human difference. They're systems. And those systems are called by some the matrix of domination. So as this example with Morpheus, take the red pill, take the blue pill. The matrix has you. So, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, also known as the matrix of domination. So, black female author Bell Hooks refers to it as white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. White male writer Robert Johnson refers to it as Alan Johnson, refers to it as the matrix of domination. It's the same thing. Okay, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So not just quote unquote white, because that's changed over time. But those who are honorary whites, which conform, and those who conform to the values of quote-unquote whiteness. So white supremacist capitalist patriarchy are supreme and superior. One race, the belief that one race is superior to others. Capitalist, and that is amoral capitalism. So there are Marxists, I'm not a Marxist, but I can criticize capitalism because of moral values, of a certain ethos, right? Amoral capitalism, that is the values of chattel slavery. That is living systems, people, animals, the land are resources, not relatives. Okay, so the values of chattel slavery, the idea is this. You can take a human woman, black woman, white, doesn't matter, a human woman, get her pregnant with your child, sell that child for a profit, and not feel anything about that. That's okay. That was the conditions in slavery. Okay, so what happens when people become resources and not relatives? I mean, would you sell your kids? Who sells their kids? That's not moral, but that becomes the basis of capitalism because that's what built this country, that trade. Okay, patriarchy, men are superior. So, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy presents itself as the natural and normal order of things. So I'll direct your attention to the golden rule and the platinum rule. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the platinum rule is also biblically based from Philippians. Do unto others the way they wish to be done unto, even if, especially if, that is better than you would be treated. So which is more valuable, gold or platinum? Which is more valuable, gold or platinum? You ain't answering, it's platinum. Do unto others the way they wish to be done unto. Even if it's better than you are treated. So, isms, when somebody asks, okay, well, what is this isms thing? So, I often do my best thinking on the freeway, being from Los Angeles. So, isms, individual structural society mentality. Isms are systems of discrimination based on perceivable human differences. So as Alan Johnson, in his book Power, Privilege, and Difference, refers to it as the matrix of domination, we don't have to fear that which we don't understand, but isms set it up so we do fear that which we don't understand. The matrix creates that fear and that ignorance. So we combat ignorance with some degree of knowledge and some degree of history, and also understanding, just as we were going to apply Kawa Ida, that politics is the science of power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And one of the principal powers is the power of definition. Let's see, I think that, yeah, right, okay. So living systems, people, animal, the land, are resource property that I, the capitalist, own, not relatives, because I paid for or invested in, discovered, even if it's in your body, you weren't using it, I can experiment with it and make money with it, and you don't get any. So what I'm talking about here is actually a real legal principle where there is a book called well, medical apartheid, which basically talks about health disparities and where black people have been used as experimental subjects for medical research without their knowledge or consent. And so there's a book, one of the stories out of Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, was taken because it's history. And white woman reporter wrote a book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Rebecca Skloot wrote The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Who Henrietta Lacks was the descendant of sharecroppers in Baltimore who had cervical cancer. And she went for treatment at Johns Hopkins, and the way they treated her medically was they packed her cervix with radium. So in other words, radioactive material. That was the treatment back then. So packing, a woman's vagina with radioactive material means that you just irradiated her entire body and given her cancer, which killed her in a month and a half. But before she died, they harvested cancer cells from her cervix and cultivated them, and that became the first of the immortal cell lines, which basically, an immortal cell line is where they take a cell and they basically let it grow and multiply and do experiments on it. So her cells went to the moon. Her cells were at atomic and H-bomb bomb blasts to study the effects of radiation. Her cells have been cultivated and used by biology and medical students all over the world. People have made billions of dollars from the medical advances from her cells. The family hasn't received a dime from that. So, in the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, like the family didn't try and seek a dime, they didn't even know that this was going on. But all of a sudden, this white man basically was having a medical procedure done and he refused to give consent and found out that the doctors had used his cells and made a bunch of money with it. And he wanted a cut. You are using my cells, my body. I never gave consent. You give me a cut. Sued in court, right? The court ruling came back. Oh, well, you gave it up. It's now medical material. It ain't your body no more. Doesn't matter that you didn't give consent. Ain't yours no more, right? So understand that this is part of that same white supremacist capitalist patriarchy system that says, oh, your body ain't your body. It's mine if I discover it and make money from it. You don't get none. All right? My rights supersede all others, including those who have lived for thousands of years before I bought the land. So money trumps everything, even morality. If you have money, you count. If you don't have money, you don't count. That's the values of capitalism. So patriarchy, heterosexual men are superior to all others. And again, though white supremacist capitalist patriarchy presents itself as the natural and normal order of things, it's less than 1,000 years old. And humans are, depending on how you count, as we will see, 250,000 years old. So one example of the matrix of domination. Like the photograph that I was using, it's invisible unless you train yourself to see it. It leaves evidence. So, for example, this UN statistic. Women constitute half of the world's population. Actually, more than half now. They perform nearly 2/3 of its work hours. They receive 1/10 of the world's income and own less than 1/100th of the world's property. And this is a UN report from 1980, which is still true. Some of it has shifted, but not much. Okay? So, in order to have these inequities in place, there has to be a structure producing them. It's not random. There's a structure producing these effects. Okay? So, that structure is part of the basis that creates what we call sexism, based on gender. Okay, so these, go to slide if you would, unless something's happened with, go to slide please. So these conditions are replicated and held in place by a matrix, which prevents access to the power to become effective. So you're taught necessarily not to see or perceive that matrix. Paulo Freire and Brazilian educators basically suggested that there is no such thing as a neutral education process. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of generations into the logic of the present system and bring about conforming to it, or it becomes the practice of freedom, that is, the means by which men and women deal critically with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of the world. So basically saying either education's purpose is to support the system going on, the matrix going on, or you can use education to transform the system. 2. He had a word for this, Conscientiousism, for which there is no word equivalent in English. Conscientiousism means learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions, and to take action against the oppressive elements of reality. It requires that you know what a healthy, functioning condition is, either by practicing it yourself or seeing enough of the condition to want to emulate it. So the practice of freedom comes from taking action against oppressive elements of reality, and what some addiction treatment texts call problems related to the social environment could either mean one's social group or one's relationship to society is part of the problem. So in the face of social inequities, the counseling relationship, for example, would address these issues in the client and with the practitioner. So when we talk about Pelfdas, pain, loss, fear, depression, anger, serenity. The presence of pain, loss, and fear and depression is often a sign of systemic inequities, and of which you're reacting to them. So liberation discourse. So conscientiousizing the race card. So race and other discriminators are not cards, but they're overt and covert rules which determine who's the dealer in the card game, who's in the game, and what hand gets dealt to who, and what cards they can play with and play when. So we're going to talk about, don't play the race card. Yeah, well, who minted the deck? Who dealt these cards? When people of color, for example, talk about racism in their hands, the race card is a joker or a 2 of diamonds. Okay? It's rarely an ace or a trump card. In public discourse, it's only an ace in the hands of those who would discredit people of color or other people of color in the service of some system of supremacy. Don't play the race card. Race is not a factor. Really. The numbers show differently. So understanding this can neutralize some of its power. So I talked about algebra. The algebra of the mending. The ink of a scholar is worth far more than the blood of a martyr. Stole that line from Lupe Fiasco, those of you familiar with him. So this is from, this quote is from Audre Lorde, the late black lesbian poet. Institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy which needs outsiders as surplus people. As members of such an economy, we have all been programmed to respond to the human difference between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways. One, ignore it. And if that's not possible, copy it if we think it's dominant, or destroy it if we think it's subordinate. Those three things are necessary for a capitalist economy, which requires that some people be unemployed, some people be homeless, some people be poor, some people be rich, the majority of people being poor and the minority of people being rich. But we have no patterns for relating across our human differences as equals. As a result, these differences have been misnamed and misused in the services of separation and confusion. So, subordination hierarchy by spirituality. So, for example, the R2 in Crash, which is a type 6 ism, and I'll go through the 6 types of isms shortly. So, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, the matrix, dominant culture, the system, the man, patriarchy, same system. White equals white, heterosexual, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. So, in white Protestant Christianity, that version of Christianity, or Catholic, you have white Jesus. It's referred to in hip-hop. White Jesus. Brown, yellow, black Protestant Catholic, still a white Jesus. So these are hierarchies, okay? So white Protestant on the top, then Catholic. Then brown, yellow, black, Protestant or Catholic. Next. Ashkenaz Judaism, Beta Israel, non-European, and then within that, so Ashkenaz Judaism, basically Jews from Europe. Judaism originally came from what we call Africa, or the so-called Middle East, but the Middle East is not how they refer to themselves. They're Africans. So, Ashkenaz Judaism, so there were no European Jews before the 7th century AD. So, Beta Israel, non-European Jewry, is a part of that hierarchy. Then, Islam. So, the 3 Abrahamic religions are at the top of the hierarchy, with Protestant Christianity being on top of Catholic, then Judaism, then we can also talk about Mormons being somewhere between Catholic and Jews, then Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and then, so the idea is then the people who are on top, the religions that are on top are those with scripture, physical buildings, dogma, etc. And then you have white Wiccans, so other non-Christians, also known as pagans. Then native spirituality. So I'm talking about relative power in this society. So even though native spirituality, so it was illegal for Native Americans here on this continent to practice their traditional spirituality before 1978. Illegal. And then African spirituality, Hebrew Israelites, Church of God and Saints Christ, um, African-based Christianity and Christianity with an African image of Jesus or Yeshua, somewhere near the bottom. Okay, so there's a hierarchy, even within religion, based on apparently race and the image. All right, so 6 types of isms. The first 2, type 1 and type 2. So it's not enough. So where this came from is that the 1970 Federal Civil Rights Commission, which had a formula, prejudice plus power equals racism. And the working theory was you had to have some form of social power to be able to reenact or enforce your prejudices. So prejudice plus power equals racism. Now, I've expanded that to say any form of social privilege can fit in this category. So there's 6 within the literature that black scientists denote. So type 1, verbal and physical assault. And then type 2, nonverbal, though they're not always nonverbal, microaggressions. So 6 types of isms. The first 2 are interpersonal between individuals and groups of individuals, and the next 4 take place through collective action and institutions. So type 1, verbal and physical assault. Overt verbal or physical assault through physical contact are also electric media. Okay, so they call you a name, or they use what the Supreme Court calls fighting words. So for example, the Supreme Court ruling nigger is a fighting word. You assume that anyone using that word is threatening immediate physical violence, therefore it's not unexpected that you launch a preemptive strike. Hence the word fighting words. So in other words, even if you're in school, you're surrounded by a bunch of white kids who call you nigger, and my parents basically said, and this has actually been the standard expectation, your protocol is you tell the teacher, you tell the principal that they're doing that. But what usually happens is the teacher or principal do nothing. So then, if they come at you, and usually they'll come at you in a group, then feel free to attack. You may use that word. Deck them. Actually, that's what my parents said. Deck them. Will allow you to be suspended or whatever. Don't use a weapon, just use your fists. Deck them. You find they won't use that word again. Maybe, maybe not. Yes?
So in the court of law, is it justifiable to use action after being called?
Well, it's actually from the Supreme Court, in a federal workplace like LCC, it's actually illegal to use the word, period. Can't use the word, and fighting words. And that's specifically forbidden and specifically illegal. You can terminate people for that, or discipline people for that. So yes, it's expected that you not, in a professional environment, deck everybody that calls you nigger. But that's what, based on that principle, the legal principle is, fighting words.
So in a setting
You can assume that somebody using that word, if they're not your friend, is another set of circumstances, that violence is about to ensue, and you can protect yourself. Not on the sticks and stones may break my bones, or words may never hurt me. No, we're not working on that. Because of the history of that word, you coming after me, I'm going to deck you. Yeah.
But it's always in a personal context, not some academic discussion.
Right. Right. Academically, I have freedom of expression, so if I'm going to use an ethnic slur, it's like I'm going to give you the history of where that ethnic slur did, like I did last week. Where did nigger come from? So negar originally meant a person from Africa. That's why you call yourself Schwarzenegger, because I'm black and from Africa. That's what Schwarzenegger means, literally, black and from Africa. So you don't give yourself that as a surname unless you're proud of that fact. So electronic media, of course, has a physical and psychological effect, but the case law is not caught up with how to deal with cyber harassment and cyber bullying yet. Type 2 isms. Go to slide, please. So type 2. So this comes from Chester Pierce and Daryl Wing Su and others. This is from Su. Racial microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to the target person or group. Now, where this came from, Chester Pierce, black psychiatrist, Navy Commodore, his area of study was extreme environments. And for the Navy, he was studying, why do you go crazy in Antarctica? Navy wants to know that. What makes you go crazy in Antarctica? Is it 100 degrees below zero? Is it that it's dark for 6 months out of the year? What is it? So what Chester found is that people don't go crazy because it's 100 degrees below zero or that it's dark. They go, what drives them over the edge is the little slights that, for example, males and male culture will do. You know, put you down, talk about your mama if you're playing the dozens, et cetera, and is those little things that are like every day that kind of get under your skin, and that's what drives you, you know, to fights and stuff like that. But a lot of those interactions are commonplace, and they're also kind of neutral because they happen all the time. And no, you shouldn't, I was just joking. I didn't mean anything by it. You know, I was just, you know, ribbing you. I was just, yeah, whatever, right? So Chet basically says, okay, so this is what makes you go crazy in Antarctica, these little, you know, microaggressions that happen. So macro is with fists, microaggressions is verbal, is it?
More passive aggressive.
Yeah, more passive aggressive, again, which is a psychological term. So Chet, being a black psychiatrist, says, okay, being black in America is like being in Antarctica. You're not getting called nigger every day, but you have these little everyday encounters where they're basically putting you down or saying you're less than, but they're ambiguous. And so, for example, you know, the one that I use often, you know, because it's happened more than once, you know, people make appointments to come see me, and they'll call up and, you know, I'd like to make an appointment with Mark Harris, and that's me, you know, and we make an appointment, and it's over the phone, right? So, and I'm speaking California newscaster English, so that's my accent, California newscaster English, and they walk in my office and they go, I'm looking for Mark Harris. That's me. And she says, oh, you don't look the way you sound over the phone. And I say, I sound taller? And she goes, yeah. And I go, what did I look like when you saw me over the phone in your mind's eye? She said, oh, you know, 6'8", blonde hair, blue-eyed. Which, you know, I'm obviously not. So I say, oh, well, you know, I'm paid to sound white, but my voice is black at the roots. And then she blushes, and I go, you must be from Oregon. She goes, well, how do you know? And I go, well, because I'm from LA, and this is what black professionals sound like in LA. So, yeah, you must not meet very many black professionals, like I said last week, you know. it's very likely that I'm the first black instructor that people have had in their entire school career in this state, which is often the case for a lot of people. All right, so that was a microaggression, right? Because she's not expecting somebody that sounds this intelligent to be black. Like you've never encountered a black college professor before, and I grew up with them. So this is normal for me. So, they are not limited to human encounters alone, but may also be environmental nature, as when a person of color is exposed to an office setting that unintentionally assails his or her racial identity. For example, one's racial identity can be minimized or made insignificant through the sheer exclusion of decorations or literature that represents various racial groups. So that's a microaggression too. You know, or the front office look, which is blonde hair and blue eyes. You know, you walk into an office, who's greeting you? So conversely, the simple inclusion of a few token posters, pictures, art, books, or people cannot be interpreted as relieving microaggressions. So from Chet's original work in the 70s, Gerald Wing Sue in the 90s and aughts basically expanded to, oh, there's like 9 species of microaggressions. Micro insults, micro assaults, etc., etc. So, you know, who and which culture created the office culture which would normally assail any racial identity other than white male? So again, you know, the matrix of domination. And then who has allegiance to maintaining that culture. And academe, so this very culture that we're in school, is part of generating and maintaining office culture. So part of, you know, this piece here in terms of when I was talking about isms and when I got that email, oh, what, are we going to do what's in the syllabus? Well, sure. You know, we can spend time on ancient Egypt, or let's talk about your world now, because it's there. It's not enough to say something's racist or classist or whatever ist it is. Okay? You also have to see where it is, to what extent it is, so that you can counter it. Right? It's like racism like cancer. I mean, saying something's racist is like saying there's smog in LA. Where is it? How far has it spread? What's the correct cure? How do you neutralize it on you? Right? That's better tactically than just, oh, it's racist. So, microassaults. Microassault is, this is again from Gerald Sue, an explicit, conscious racial derogation characterized primarily by a verbal or nonverbal attack meant to hurt the intended victim through name-calling, avoidant behavior, or purposefully discriminatory actions, referring to someone as colored, which is a dated term, oriental, another dated term, half-breed, or other racial epithet or dated term. So this is a level obviously lower than fighting words. Discouraging or disparaging interracial interactions, serving white patrons before someone of color, displaying swastikas or Confederate flags is a microaggression. Color blindness. Say, oh, I don't see color. That's a microaggression. All right? Now, the original constructs that I'm showing you were applied to race because they came from black social scientists who, okay, reacting to the American Psychological Association that says racism doesn't exist, which, okay, if you came from a psychiatrist that said we're crazy for escaping slavery, so why should I believe in the APA? Well, I have degrees in psychology, so I have to use their tenets to some degree, but I was raised by black psychiatrists and medical people, so we have our own science on this. So, when I see a Confederate flag or a swastika, I'm not so much offended by, hey, I'm thinking, thank you, enemy, for showing me who you are and being obvious. I appreciate that. I like knowing where people stand. But other people can be disturbed, and it is in fact a microaggression, so. So, old-fashioned racism conducted on an individual level, often in private situations that offer the perpetrator anonymity or insulation, can take the form of telling a person of color that another person, like usually a white person in this situation, used a racial term, and then you confront the person that they accuse, and they say, well, I deny. No, I never said that. I have a black friend in high school. Whatever. And then saying anything when the person of color reports or confronts, and that makes you look crazy. So this is actually a common game that's played within office settings where there's mixed race folks. So perpetrators often hold notions of minority inferiority and will display them publicly, especially in loss of control situations when they feel safe, either anonymous or protected. Often using, so for example, following somebody around in a store, like I've been dressed in three-piece suits and got followed around because I'm like buying a tie. Like, really? You think I'm gonna steal wearing a suit and a tie? That's a microaggression. Or as happened, recently in the local health food store, a relative of mine was, refused a return on a $12 item. So, wow, okay. Microaggression. Micro-insult. Communications that convey rudeness and insensitivity, demeaning the person's racial heritage or identity, subtle or not so subtle snubs, frequently unknown to the perpetrator, but clearly conveying a hidden insulting message to a recipient of color. For example, AA means not African American, but affirmative action. The most qualified should get the job regardless of race. Wait, your preference is white. So if I'm more qualified than you, should not be getting the job? But if you're saying that, you're implying that I'm getting the job because of some racial quota? No. How did you get your job? Affirmative action quotas got you your job, which you were otherwise not qualified to get. That's the implication. You're not qualified, they had to fill a racial quota, so boom, you got the job unfairly over a qualified white person. Oh, the qualifications are there's somebody's relative. So, white instructor fails to acknowledge students of color, or their eyes glaze over when non-white heirs are concerned, like, oh, there you go again. Why don't you people stop whining? Just pull up your bootstraps. This is the greatest country in the world. If you have the balls to make some money, just go make some money. Micro-invalidations. So, micro-invalidations characterized by communications that exclude, negate, or nullify the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. So, for example, I don't go to Denny's restaurants because of what happened in the 90s with Clinton's Secret Service detail. So, the Secret Service, black agents, white agents, they go to a Denny's in DC, they're wearing suits and ties, they've got their Uzis, their sidearms, not visible, but they're Secret Service, right? So they sit in adjoining tables, black agents with black agents, white agents with white agents, in the same section. The waitress comes in, gives the white agents menus and water, takes their order, walks away. It's her section. And the agents are sitting next to each other. The black agents, just watching this, they're waiting 45 minutes while the white agents got their food and paid their bill, and the white agents are going, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? These are our brother agents. literally, in both senses of the word, right? Denny's got sued, federal lawsuit, right, and had to employ diversity training. Well, I know some people did the training. It's kind of hilarious in one sense. Not so funny. So, right. What was that all about? How is that not race? So they didn't get called nigger, right? Just denied service. All right, so compliments about one's speech or diction with underlying assumptions of foreign birth. Now, I have been asked, oh, where are you from? Or, you speak so well, you're so articulate. Yeah, I teach college. Okay. I don't see color. We are all human beings, are statements that neither acknowledge, negate, nor neutralize systemic discrimination. The effect is to negate the experience of as racial and cultural beings, regardless of the intent of the speaker. So, Darrell Sue et al., 9 types of species of microaggressions. So, alien in your homeland, your own homeland. Where are you from? Ascription of intelligence. So this can where ascription means they don't think that you are as intelligent as you could be because of your appearance. Color blindness. Yes, Eddie?
So it's like not ascribing intelligence as an inherent.
Right.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Color blindness is a form of racial microaggression. Criminality, assumption of criminal status. So, for example, the last time I was racially profiled, which by the Eugene police anyway, was the 80s. You know, I'm driving a car in the Whitaker, which, you know, I lived in the Whitaker at the time, and they called the Whitaker Felony Flats, which I didn't know. I'm from LA, and, you know, the ghetto doesn't have cherry trees and lawns where I'm from, so, you know, I didn't know. I was coming back from a softball game on Sunday wearing my Whitebird t-shirt, my beater 72 Valiant Dart slant 6, or Dodge Valiant slant 6 with the smoke feature. Anyway, I get pulled over, and immediately the police officer asks me, can I see your license and registration? Well, yeah, sure. Why'd you stop me? Well, your left tail light was blinking intermittently. Well, no, not really. It was working fine, but okay. So I show her my license, and she goes, have you ever been arrested? Okay, blinking tail light to my arrest record. Well, it's Sunday. I'll play along. Yeah, I was arrested once when I was 17, because she's looking at my license. You know, I'm 35 at the time. 17 arrests? No, officer, I was arrested once when I was 17. What was that for, theft? Okay, so, in those situations, you get hyper calm, hyper clear. No, officer, I work for Whitebird. I'm a drug counselor. I have a master's degree. I have to have experience in drugs and counseling. So, I'm just coming back from Whitebird softball game. So I was arrested once when I was 17. I was only black in a car full of white kids. The cops thought we were smoking weed. 2 strip searches later, didn't find any weed. Charges were dropped. Don't have to even tell you about that because it was when I was 17 and I'm 35 now. But you asked. So, do you have any other questions for me? Do you have any warrants or speeding tickets? Not in this state. Oh, what state? Do you know anybody? I have speeding tickets from California. Do you know anybody that does a speed limit on I-5 between LA and San Francisco? No. Okay. All right. Criminality, assumption of criminal status. 1 arrest. Lots of speeding tickets. Denial of individual racism. Oh, I'm not racist. I have a black friend. I mean, she said that, a year or so later. On another matter. Myth of meritocracy. That is, people, all they have to do is work hard and they'll succeed. Pathologizing cultural values, communication styles. Second-class status and environmental invalidation. This is the microaggression where they don't have posters or anything like that that represent your folks. So in therapy, because these constructs were developed in psychology, the alien in your own homeland, basically the message is you're not a real American or you're not qualified. No. Ascription of intelligence, assigning a value of intelligence or being surprised at your intelligence. Colorblindness. Race and culture do not really affect people's lives. You're making excuses, playing the race card. Criminality, just did that. 17 arrests. Denial of individual racism. Your racial oppression is no different than my gender or class oppression. Myth of meritocracy, you need to work hard. If you don't succeed, it's your own individual fault. Pull up your pants, stop sagging. So pathologizing cultural values and communication styles. So it's calling you borderline personality disorder when you're loud, emotional, confrontational, social anxiety disorder when you avoid eye contact, because some cultures actually don't look you directly in the eye, considered disrespectful. Second class status, so the level of welcome or a white preference shown as welcome, and environmental invalidation. So building names, pictures, staffing reflect that you don't belong. Only white people can succeed in this particular place, and you're an outsider. So I also leave up the skill building piece. So microaggressions are things that occur most often, especially after fighting words have been made illegal. So they often contribute to hypertension and other long-term chronic diseases like diabetes and other things like that. So if a client's culture has developed skills for dealing with the microaggressions, the skills should be encouraged by the therapist. And if a client's culture has not developed those skills, but skills exist in another culture, the client should be taught these skills in a manner that reinforces them. Now, obviously, many people never heard of microaggressions until it started becoming a buzzword in the last, say, 5 years. Growing up with black psychologists, I knew about it 20 years ago, but, So, we'll continue this more on Wednesday.